Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
Hey, Bobby!
I'm still here.
Now do you care?
The Wrong Girl, or The Right Girl, submitted by Jess is a Mess. I was 26 years old working the afternoon shift at a medical billing office and taking business classes at a community college 3 nights a week. At that point, my life was painfully ordinary, and I liked it that way. I had a small second-floor apartment in a building and spent weekends with friends and just dreamed about finally graduating and getting a better job. Nothing dramatic ever happened to me until one day I was cutting across a parking lot and saw a man who was looking directly at me and smiling. He looked to be somewhere in his late 40s and was wearing an old brown jacket despite the warm September weather. He wasn't particularly memorable except for his eyes. I mean, they never blinked. As I got to my car, he started walking towards me with this grin that made my stomach tighten up, and he said, "Nina, I knew I'd find you." I looked behind me, expecting to see another woman. When I didn't see anyone there, I turned back to the man and said, "Excuse me?" He stopped a couple of feet away from me and said, "You don't have to pretend anymore." I looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, my name isn't Nina." And he said, "No, you're Nina, I'm sure of it." I just got into my car without another word and locked the doors, and he stood there watching while I backed out. Even as I drove away, he remained perfectly still, smiling like we just shared some kind of private joke. As I drove, I convinced myself that he'd just mistaken me for someone else. I mean, that sort of thing happens all the time. But that explanation lasted exactly 2 days. Wednesday night, when I was walking across campus after class, I saw him sitting on a bench outside the student center. He stood immediately when he saw me and said, "Nina!" The hair on my arms stood up. He crossed the sidewalk walking towards me and said, "I've been worried about you." I said, "Look, man, you've got the wrong person." And he just said, "No, you just don't remember." Thank God there were students everywhere, but I did pick up my pace and got back to my car while pretending not to notice that he was following behind me maybe 20 feet. He stopped at the edge of the parking lot and yelled out, "I'll see you tomorrow, Nina." I reported him to campus security that night. They told me that they'd searched the grounds but didn't find any guy like my description. But the officer assured me it was probably just a confused man. And yeah, I really wanted to believe that too. Friday afternoon, flowers arrived at my office. No card, just a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the ribbon. The note said, "You always loved white lilies. Love, Jay." I don't know where the hell he got that from. I hate lilies. But my coworkers teased me about having a secret admirer until I quietly asked reception if she'd seen who delivered them. My friend Karen said, "Yeah, a guy in a brown jacket. He said you'd know who they were from." I threw the flowers in the dumpster immediately. But that night, someone knocked on my apartment door around midnight. I looked through the peephole, and the hallway was empty. When I opened the door just a crack, I saw another white lily on the welcome mat. I lost my shit. I slammed the door, called my mom, and then called my friend. I told them everything that had been going on. They told me to calm down, but if things got worse, to make sure that I called the police and obviously let the building management know. After that, I started checking my mirrors while driving. Every unexpected sound outside my apartment sent me peeking through the blinds. I eventually called the police, and they took my report, but there wasn't much they could do without any threats or violence. The guy I talked to said, "Maybe he just thinks you're someone else, but if he comes back, call us." That advice always sounds comforting until you actually live through this kind of thing. The following week, I met with friends at a crowded sports bar to celebrate one of their birthdays, and for almost 2 hours, I forgot about all of that stuff. Then I looked toward the dartboards, and there he was, standing by himself, watching me. The music was loud and people were laughing at us, yet somehow I could hear his voice perfectly as he mouthed one word: "Nina." I left immediately, and he followed me onto the sidewalk, saying, "Don't leave." I started booking it, not because he was following me, but because he didn't. He just watched me run away with that same weird smile, and somehow that made things worse that he wasn't following me. I made up my mind to change all of my routines. I stopped going to my normal grocery store, I stopped going to the gas station down the street, and I started taking different routes to work, even though it made me late some days. But none of that mattered. Sometimes I'd see him across the street, and again I saw him on campus too. Alerting campus security didn't really seem to do much. I called the police to let them know I was seeing him around town, and they said that they would cruise by my apartment at least once a night. But again, that did nothing. Some friends suggested that I stay with them, and I did that for several nights, doing the old couch surfing thing. One afternoon, my friend opened her front door to find a white lily waiting outside. He knew where I was, and that terrified me more than seeing him anywhere. He wasn't following my normal routines, he was following me, if that makes sense. The nightmares started after that. I'd dream about opening my apartment door to find hundreds of lilies filling the hallway, and I'd hear his voice saying, "Nina," until I woke up screaming. I had that dream 100 times if I had it once. I got permission from my professors to stop attending class, and I did that for nearly 2 weeks. I stopped going out, stopped answering calls unless I recognized the number. My world shrank to work and home. But that didn't do anything either. He started appearing outside my office, and one afternoon I finally snapped. I saw him across the parking lot, and I should have called security, but I was so pissed off I went right over to him and said, "What the fuck do you want from me?" He just looked at me and said, "Nina, I just want you to come home." Again, we'd been through this, and I said, "Dude, I have no idea who you are." And he said, "I know you, you're Nina." And I said, "My name is Jessica." Now, probably not the smartest thing I should have done in that situation. But he just looked at me and said, "No, you're Nina." And I turned and got back to my car as fast as I could. I'm going to tell you this now because it's extremely important for the rest of this story. My parents divorced when I was 3, and my mother raised me alone after that and said my father died shortly after, and I never really knew him. Anyway, back to the story. October arrived with cold rain and early sunsets, and I began carrying pepper spray everywhere. I only parked beneath bright lights, I was getting walked to and from my car whether I was at work or on campus, and as soon as I got home I checked every room of my apartment. I was walking around scared out of my mind constantly. Then, one Thursday evening, I returned from work just after dusk, and the courtyard between the apartment buildings was nearly empty. As I was crossing over to my building, someone stepped out from behind a tree, and it was him. He blocked the sidewalk, and this time he didn't look too happy to see me. He just said, "Nina." His voice was cold, and then he said, "You're not leaving again." He reached inside his jacket and pulled a knife out, and I screamed, and that seemed to stop time for a second. He grabbed my wrist with his other arm, and I stumbled backwards to get away from him, and he lunged at me, but before he reached me, another guy came out of nowhere and tackled him from the side with enough force to send them both crashing onto the concrete. Thankfully, the knife fell out of his hand, and whoever this new person was shouted, "Police, don't move." This guy wasn't in any uniform, he was just wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, but the badge hanging from his belt caught the light, and I knew he wasn't lying. But this crazy guy continued to fight with him. The police officer yelled, "Somebody call 911, and now people were pouring out onto their balconies. Obviously somebody did, because within a couple of seconds, patrol cars screamed up to our apartment complex. By this time, I was just sitting against a brick wall while paramedics checked me for injuries, and across the courtyard, officers handcuffed the man. Even while they were searching him, he kept looking for me, yelling out, "Nina! Nina!" And I'm not going to say the last name that he called out. But he said it again, "Nina blank, tell them." One of the responding officers stopped writing whatever he was writing in his pad, and he looked from the suspect to me, and then he said, "Did he say Nina blank?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what he said." And of course the crazy guy said, "Yeah, that is Nina blank." The officer looked at me closely and said, "Ma'am, what's your last name?" I told him, and he looked confused. He said, "Wow, I know a Nina Blank." Everything stopped, and I just said, "What?" And he said, "Look, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I responded to a domestic disturbance involving a woman named Nina Blank about a year ago. She lives over in Ashford. Ashford was a couple of towns away from mine." The officer shook his head and said, "My God, I have to be honest with you again. You look exactly like this Nina Blank." I didn't know what to do. I was happy they finally arrested this guy, but now I was even more confused than anything else. The police officer became kind of a friend to me, and he started looking into a few things for me. I don't know how much of it was legal or illegal, but he did find a lot. It was something I was not prepared for. He found old court records, old adoption paperwork, and years of lies. My parents hadn't divorced when I was 3. They'd separated before I could remember, but it wasn't then. When my mother gave birth, she delivered identical twin girls. She kept me, and my father kept the other one. Each parent started over in different towns, and neither of them ever told either one of us that we were sisters. It never even came up. As I mentioned, I grew up thinking my father was dead, and I'm sure my sister was told the same thing about my mom. Truth is, Nina Blank was real. And yep, she had my face, my eyes, my smile, or maybe the other way around if you look at it that way. Obviously, she was 26 years old too, and she'd spent her whole life believing she was an only child just like me. This stalker had become obsessed with her after working briefly near her apartment years earlier. She'd moved away without telling anyone except close family, and unable to find her, he eventually mistook me for the woman that he'd been looking for. My police friend helped me track Nina down, and a couple of weeks later we finally met. And neither of us spoke for almost 5 minutes. We just kept staring at each other. It felt like looking into a mirror that had somehow learned to breathe on its own. Nina cried, and so did I, and we'd hugged as though we'd known each other forever, grieving not only for what had happened, but everything we'd lost by growing up apart. You can't just get back 26 years, and we couldn't erase the terror that brought us together. But we could make sure neither of us ever had to wonder again whether or not we had family. Oh, but back to the guy. He was declared mentally competent enough to stand trial and was convicted on multiple charges, including aggravated attempted assault, stalking, and weapons offenses. Even after he disappeared from my life behind jail bars, I couldn't hear someone calling out across a parking lot without my pulse racing, and I still look over my shoulder whenever I leave work. And of course, the lilies. I remember the smile of that creep that sent me those lilies. I still hate them to this day. I apologize for the length of this story, but I guess I'll just wrap it up here by just saying, the cruelest part of all of this is that he wasn't completely wrong. I for sure wasn't Nina. She was out there all along, and I wish we'd just found each other under different circumstances. But to him, I was Nina. And honestly, as creepy as he was and the weird stuff that he did that I'll never forgive him for, I can't really fault him for thinking I was my sister. Possible Mimic in the Mountains at Night by Twardzy's Bart. I can't get this out of my head, and I apologize for my bad English. I live in Poland, and during the winter break back in February, my friend and I planned this whole sunrise hike in the mountains south of our city. Unfortunately, this friend of mine had to bail on me at the last minute, just a few hours before we were supposed to start. I was super disappointed, so I decided to go completely alone into the woods at night, which, looking back, I realized was a pretty dumb idea. I caught the earliest bus available, way in the middle of the night, and I was the only passenger on it. After the bus dropped me off at the foot of the mountain, I started my ascent. Just for context, there was heavy snowfall the day and night before, so there was a ton of fresh snow. I hiked through the forest with my headlamp on, a sled in one hand, and a bottle of bear spray in the other, because I like to be cautious and ready for anything. Right from the start, I was a little anxious and freaked out since it was my first time hiking alone at night, so I was intentionally making a lot of noise. Making noise in the woods alerts nearby animals that a human is around, which reduces the chances of accidentally sneaking up on a bear or something and scaring it and triggering an attack. The first part of the hike went smoothly, and I occasionally saw some eyes reflecting my headlamp in the dark woods. But that is pretty common, usually just some deer or foxes. But here's the part that makes me question what I actually saw. About 40 minutes to an hour before sunrise, when it was still pitch black out, I was hiking through a very wide and winding part of the trail. Suddenly, I saw something move incredibly fast on the section of the trail right above me. I couldn't get a good look at it because it was moving so quickly, so I just figured it was a deer and ignored it. But the next thing I knew, this thing appeared right in front of me and rushed straight at me. I totally freaked out and in a split second was ready to fight for my life, until I noticed it was just an old man on skis. A massive wave of relief washed over me. As he passed by, I laughed out of pure adrenaline and told him how much he'd fucking scared me. But here's the weird part. Right after that, he stopped behind me for a second. I tried to make out some details like his eyes, but I couldn't see them that well. He just let out this faint, hollow, empty chuckle and skied off. For a while after the hike, I didn't think much of it, but later I started to really reflect on it. First, there was his completely emotionless, empty expression. And second, his features were strangely faint and hard to make out. And then it hit me. This dude was skiing down a mountain through a dense forest nearly an hour before sunrise in the pitch blackness. And he didn't have any lights. No flashlight, no headlamp, nothing. Yet he was skiing down perfectly in the absolute dark. Now, it might not sound too crazy to you, but why would someone ski down before the sunrise? Like he could have waited just a bit to actually see it, but he chose to head down in total darkness. And also, this would mean that he had to ski tour up the mountain throughout the whole ass night. Also, there weren't any other buses running at that time, and there were 0 cars parked in the lot at the foot of the mountain. On top of that, skiing without any source of light in those conditions should have been physically impossible. Do I think it was a mimic? I honestly don't know. I don't know what to think. Maybe someone out here has some insight or experience with that sort of crap. I don't know a whole lot about this mythology, paranormal folklore stuff. But I do know that near the place I was hiking, there's a peak with a history stretching back to 500 BC, which was used by early Slavic people as a fortification and an offering and burial site. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.